Good afternoon. Welcome to everyone here attending our webinar. This is Hybrid Workplaces, Future or Fad. I've got a couple of guests here with me today I'd like to introduce. So Laura Manescu. Laura is a talent strategist. She works for one of Australia's big four banks. She's got about a decade of experience in finance and in banking. She spent the last 3.5 years as a talent strategist. And currently responsible for the end-to-end planning for the employee lifecycle for the bank's graduate program, which includes recruitment and learning and coaching across the business. Scott Barber is an experienced business leader who's worked in UK, in Asia Pacific and Singapore specifically, and now in Australia. He works in the technology and has worked in the travel space for many years. And he's led both operational sales teams, whether they've been office-based and remote across a number of global offices. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you very much. So today we're talking about hybrid workplaces. So I thought just very quickly, let's just define hybrid to make sure we're all talking on the same page. So hybrid means something that combines two different elements. So a hybrid workplace, in my mind, essentially provides employees with varying degrees of freedom to choose of when and where they want to work, whether that be in the office, at home, or maybe a quiet corner of a cafe or a hotel lobby. Different businesses and different people see hybrid differently. But I think the core is the ability to share your work time between the home and the office. So just briefly, what's your kind of overview and understanding of hybrid and feeling of it, Scott?
Yeah, so it's definitely fair to say my views have changed over the last sort of 18 months, but I'm probably still a bit of a fence sitter because I can see huge opportunities for both employers and employees, but I can see some risks as well. So and I think they're probably the things that we're going to get into. So bit of a fence sitter at the minute.
Okay, pros and cons. Laura?
I love it. No, I'm excited for today's conversation. And, you know, I mentioned this, some of the conversations we've had prior. I'm quite positive about it. Definitely acknowledge that, you know, part of today's talking about the challenges as well and what will organizations need to overcome. But I think the most exciting prospect is that we actually have the chance to challenge the way we've done things for a very long time. And that's probably what most excites me about this. And one of the things we've been talking about is just the fact that, you know, for Australia, particularly at the moment, I know that it's a little different. We've had obviously the situation happening in Melbourne at the moment, and our thoughts go out to everyone in lockdown. But we've largely been very fortunate in Australia to have sort of these return to work plans engaged in a lot of major organizations and thinking about what hybrid work arrangements actually look like. A lot of countries are still in a completely remote environment. So I think that's another really exciting part of this topic today, is thinking about, you know, what does that look like for our landscape, and also hopefully those lessons, how can they help us globally?
Excellent, thank you. So obviously you mentioned COVID. It's not something we can ignore. How do you think the COVID-19 has impacted the way we work? Do you think that we had an amazing shift last year in March, where we went from almost nobody worked full-time at home to everyone working at home, and it was happened over a weekend. And I would say that it was largely successful for most businesses. Do you feel that has fundamentally changed the relationship between the employee and the employer, or the employee and the workspace? What's your feelings, Scott?
I think it's actually remarkable. I know we don't want to dwell too much on 2020, but you think about kind of what happened and how quickly it happened. It's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, I've got friends who've talked about this, that have planned this in any organization. It would be, you know, a year in the making, so many work groups and so many, we can't possibly do it. And then there you are, within days, you got a whole organization shifting to working remotely. So I think first thing, it's absolutely remarkable that we're able to do it. Testament to kind of how far technology's come in recent years. I think there was a lot of goodwill given by employees, you know, often not working in satisfactory conditions, but it was a crisis situation, right? So you do what you need to do to get the job done. And they're the things that kind of, I wonder now, have they evolved, or have we still got people on laptop in the back bedroom working on their bed in a very unergonomic manner? But, you know, it's also kind of fueled this desire now that, well, we've done it for a year. Why on earth would we need to go back to an office? Or why would I need to be in the office kind of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, like I used to be? So I think that's kind of sparked some curiosity around people as to why things would need to revert back.
So I think we've proved that home working works.
I think by and large, and I think we'll probably come on to kind of some of the downsides, but by and large, it was proven that it could happen. But notwithstanding, there was an awful lot of goodwill by employees to get it to such an extent.
Got it. Laura?
Yeah, I think the question is probably about, can it be sustained? Because I think the way it was last year, particularly when we were in lockdown and it was 100% remote, there's question marks over, the connection piece and the social, and then, high touch collaborative projects. Some of those things do benefit quite a lot from the face-to-face interaction. So it's probably not so much that it's here to stay in last year's format. I think it's more so that probably it's not really, we're probably not going back to how things were before 2020, but we're probably also going towards a new normal. And that's what a lot of people, I think, are thinking about now. What is that combination where you have got hybrid arrangements, and those hybrid arrangements aren't the same for every employee. So what does that look like on a spectrum? If your organization's not mandating, 2 days a week in the office, what does it mean for one person who lives, has now sort of relocated down the coast, whereas you have someone else who wants to come in 5 days a week? So it's just a really interesting period of redefining things. And I definitely have to echo what Scott said about, I was just so impressed last year, like seeing how quickly organizations pivoted, how quickly employees pivoted, and then thinking about all the technology that rose to the surface in that time to kind of support what we needed. So yeah, it's been fascinating, really, the last 12 months.
Absolutely. So I think that's a really good point, Scott, around the goodwill, and businesses can't just carry on relying on that. But I suppose there is that risk of slipping back to the old ways if we don't put work at making it work. What do you think? Do you think this was do you think COVID made it happen, or do you think it was just accelerating something that maybe was inevitable or was in progress?
I think. Sorry, I was going to say that there have been teams that have been working remotely for years. So this is not a new concept, right? It's just a new concept to do it at scale. I think, Mercer do a report every year on kind of workforce engagement and things. And even prior to COVID, one of the top 10 reasons people were leaving their employer, was because there wasn't flexibility. So the desire to be more flexible in their working day has been there for a long time. And then, COVID's proven it's possible. So I suspect it's been bubbling away for a while.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with that, Scott. I mean, you just see it from, at least in large scale organizations, there was generally in many areas a norm where it was supported to work from home 1 day a week and things like that. And you were seeing a lot of that driven out of employee demand for that flexibility. So I just echo the point. It just feels like a very rapid acceleration of what we were seeing, and now trying to figure out, well, what is that balance and medium, and does that look different across different industries or across different job families? Like, that's probably one of the key conversations, and what companies will have to think about. How does it apply to me in my industry for my products and my organizational setup?
Well, it certainly seems that most people are pretty positive around hybrid. I've been looking at some of the surveys that have been put out in the last year and 6 months, and Atlassian sponsored a survey end of last year that said 62% want some flexibility in when and where they work. 32% want to be based at home, and only 7% said they wanted to be office-based full-time. Slack did something similar. They found that 63% wanted hybrid, 20% just want to work from home, and 17% still want to be back in the office. I did a recent poll on LinkedIn, and I saw that there were 13% of people, the diehards, that still want to be there in the office day to day, Monday, Friday. They love that FaceTime. But 46% wanted 2 to 3 days a week in the office, and 41% either wanted 1 day or wanted to be allowed to go in when needed. I think it's really interesting statistics. I mean, IDC did something in the Australia, New Zealand market, and they found that 69% of businesses are going to allow employees to work from one or more days a week, and in New Zealand, the actual hybrid approach is even more favoured than in Australia, with 50% of businesses saying they want to go hybrid, only 41% in Australia. So I think interesting numbers. And I think this is starting to tell out. I mean, I don't know what your feeling is in the CBD. There certainly seems to be less people on the ground on a daily basis. I spoke to a real estate operator and some facilities managers recently, and the numbers they're saying around office occupancy, particularly in Sydney CBD, is around 40–50%. And this is, well, I suppose, 6 to 9 months after any real restrictions have been in this market. So certainly seems to be popular. I actually did a LinkedIn post recently and asked for some comments and got some interesting comments back. Ed Hewitt, who's in finance recruitment, said, absolutely, hybrid is absolutely here to stay. Finance companies are already making it permanent policy. James Taylor, as a CTO, said to me that we won't truly know until COVID is over, but he does believe a hybrid model will emerge as an option for those who demand it. And Ben Finley from Deloitte said that the big professional services firms are seeing hybrid as a source of competitive advantage. It's the way to attract top talent and a massive cost saver. So I think something we'll talk about in a minute. So one of the things I really wanted to ask you is, what do you think are the key advantages for both employees and for employers in having a hybrid workspace? Laura, what's your feeling around that?
I think if we start with the employees, I mean, really flexibility is probably the key thing, like to be supported for the lifestyle that you have, the goals that you have. I think all of that has been really what we're hearing loud and clear. So one of the things that's been quite evident is you talk about things like caring arrangements, like for people to feel supported, to pick up the kids, to log off early, you know, spend time with them, put them to bed, and then actually log back on, and feeling a bit more support for that than perhaps there was previous to COVID. I know that many big organizations did support those arrangements. It just wasn't necessarily very normalized, and it depended on your team leader. So I think that aspect of, you know, home life and caring responsibilities. But if you think about it, even for other personal goals, if you do extracurricular work or you play sport or whatever it is for you outside of work, I think having that support to flex your time has been really interesting and a big part of the benefit and demand for employees. And in that sense, there's really just the sense of more and greater trust. Like if that's what we've had to see in the last 12 months, is an employer has to have a greater level of trust to allow their workforce to work from home and to find new ways to measure success, you know, not just the timesheets and not just that face time. So I think that's been really interesting. And probably the less tangible aspect of that is, how does that make you feel as an employee? To feel like you're trusted to manage your time more where it's feasible for your role type, I think it goes a long way to that kind of, feeling like you can be at your best in the workplace. And that then has benefits for the organizations and for us as employers. It's hugely powerful to feel like your workforce can then do things that are going to suit their lifestyle and passions, as well as being able to come to work at their best and to work at a time that suits, you know, if you don't like working early mornings, to work at a time where your brain's most awake and you're most engaged as well. I think that's really some of the key benefits I see from an employee perspective in particular. Scott, I'm not sure if you have any other thoughts on the employee side.
I just echo a lot of what you said. I think probably just to pick up on a couple of those. So from a work-life balance point of view, there has been a shift outside of metropolitan region, because people have kind of moved a little bit further out on the basis that they can either work from home full-time, or, you know, they're prepared to do a longer commute less frequently. So if I have to go into the office 1 or 2 days a week, I'm prepared to suffer an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours as a commute, but I can't do that every day. That's, you know, it's going to just kill my life. So I think that has opened up a whole new world of opportunity for people to buy houses that weren't there before, have a bigger house, and so on and so forth. So I think that's kind of one key element that's come out of it. I did have a second one, but it's just dropped out of my mind.
Actually, Scott, I think we had a comment from one of the attendees saying, from Melanie Armstrong, saying that she felt that the hybrid model expands recruitment strategy to no longer target top candidates based on location. So I think that also echoes your opportunity, not just for employees to find work. Not everyone has to move into the city and live in the expensive suburbs, and businesses can find great candidates who may live outside.
Well, exactly. And that comes back to probably one of the employer benefits is you've now got a more diverse talent pool to draw from. If you're not just drawing from, regional city location based people, you've got a more diverse opportunity, which is one of the key benefits for them, I would imagine.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and for return to work, if you think about people who might have not felt like they were in a position to return to work after they've had kids, for example, or maybe just in terms of the way that they manage their work arrangements, there is a possibility to hopefully in the longer term see more people entering the workforce if they feel like they can be supported to manage their own commitments. And so that element of diversity, I think, is critical. It's not just the location base, which is a huge thing already, but then, who else are we attracting back into the workforce when we can offer them things that are more flexible for their lifestyle?
I think diversity is important, Tish, and I want to come back to that because it's certainly one of the things that I picked up in my conversations with you, Scott and Laura. What do you think current employees and prospective employees will be demanding from their future employers as they look for a new job, or they look at whether they want to stay with the employer they've got now?
I mean, for me, I think the first thing is clarity. So we had this kind of crisis process where everybody worked from home. We're now in this kind of, some organizations are saying, actually, that's the way it's going to be. Some are saying, actually, we want you back. Some is somewhere in the middle. But there does seem to be some vagueness and gray areas around what that actually means. So I want you back 1 day a week. Why? For what purpose? Unless I'm going to be back on that day with all my colleagues, I may as well be sat by myself at home. So I think, there just needs to be a little bit of thought around the return to or the move to a hybrid approach. I fully agree that there's days of the week where people should be in, because I think the collaboration elements, the ideation, the celebration are all things that work better face to face. But unless you're kind of anchoring certain times or certain days, then it kind of defeats the purpose, because you may end up on a day when nobody else is in the office. So broadly speaking, what I'm saying is there needs to be a lot more clarity around how hybrid is going to operate in our environment. And I'm not sure everybody's done that yet. I think some of the other things to consider is, okay, so we now have a hybrid team. How do we build and maintain engagement amongst that team, which is easier if you're face to face? It's not hard. It just takes a lot of thought around, check-ins, formalizing check-ins through the course of the day, formalizing days where you are going to come in, and indeed other kind of team building things that would happen as well.
I think we all identify there are certainly challenges in remote working and hybrid offices, and I think we'll come to that in a second, where we kind of review that again. So do you think, Laura, you're involved in kind of talent, and you're involved in the graduate program. When people are looking for jobs, I think we can see that whether a business offers hybrid, whether it gives the people those flexibility and those things we're looking for, will be important when looking for a new employer. Do you think it will change how employers recruit, and just the recruitment process and the people they're looking for, and the talents and attitudes, I suppose, that they look for?
I think it will take time. We are seeing some changes, like organizationally at the moment. I'm definitely observing there are a lot more interviews being hosted virtually, even where the candidates are in person, because people are in on different days, and particularly when you're talking about cross-functional teams, if you've got co-interviewers who are across different departments. So I think it has, logistically, it's definitely changed just the format of interviews. And for example, for graduate programs, it's changed the assessment center format. That's a very traditional and long-standing approach for major large-scale organizations. They run these big assessment center days. So those have really shifted. And by remaining virtual in some cases, we've been able to bring candidates from New Zealand, from Perth, from all across Australia, without having people fly in and be tired from this sort of red-eye flight. So it's definitely changed format. Whether that sticks longer term I'm not sure. I'm quite interested to see what happens. But as for the skills, I definitely think it'll change what skills we're looking for, particularly the demands of leaders. So I just think in a hybrid world, the critical thing, and we'll probably talk about this more, but that soft skills piece, particularly emotional intelligence, how you lean in, how you're reading people and working with your stakeholders when you've largely eliminated body language and other cues that really make a large part of the dialogue. So I think being able to work with people and hire people who have great communication skills but are able to lean in across channels, that is going to be increasingly important. And so it is, we're going to have to change the capabilities we're assessing for in the interview process, or at least upweight them. They're not new skills, but really just saying, well, these are actually non-negotiable for certain roles, or for most roles, in fact, in the future of work. So I do think it needs to shift. Whether organizations have actively shifted recruitment in significant ways yet, I'm not sure about, and whether they're actively advertising roles across new regions and new markets, I also think that's probably a mixed bag. Yeah.
So, I mean, Scott, do you feel that there is, I mean, we've had some conversations prior to this webinar, and one of the things that we started talking about was some of the soft skills that Laura mentioned, and maybe the need to provide training and coaching for employees and for leaders. And one of the things I've felt that it's a great idea. It's not something we've done previously, and I was never trained to go to meetings, how to do a meeting. I was never really trained to do a job interview either, as an employer. So maybe now that we're starting to, this is allowing us to review some of the practices and some of the norms. Do you think there'll be some positive change?
Well, I mean, the talent acquisition and the recruitment process is just the start of the whole journey, right? And it's a spectrum of activities that need to be reviewed, because once you've got the job, you've got the onboarding piece, which, I just started a new role last week, and my onboarding experience has been largely face-to-face, which has been great because you're building up a rapport and a relationship with all of the stakeholders you're meeting. I'm kind of feeling more comfortable to probe and ask some more deeper questions. A colleague of mine started in Perth, and he's working remotely, and I'm pretty sure we're having quite different experiences as we go down this journey, just because the very nature of people, we engage a lot more face to face. I can swivel my chair and ask a question a lot more easily. So it comes back to that kind of learning through osmosis sort of thing, which is an area of concern for me around particularly the junior staff. If you're not kind of in an office listening, then I do worry about the skills gap. So the onboarding piece, definitely there needs to be consideration how to do that optimally. I think there's definitely, formal ways you can do that, videos, Teams meetings, all those kind of things. But getting under the skin of a culture and the values of an organization isn't so easy to do remotely. And then all the way through I saw something just popped up on the chat message around reward and recognition. Excellent point. Our reward and recognition systems are largely skewed towards, I've seen you in the office, therefore you must be working very, very hard because you were in half an hour earlier. So we need to change kind of how we do that as well. And then, of course, right up to kind of getting promoted. And again, that kind of skews to potentially there being a two-tier system where people who are being seen to be eager and in the office and hungry for more work are being perceived potentially differently from those that are not.
Well,
so
hold that thought, because we'll come back to some. Obviously, there are significant challenges, and I think certainly myself and Laura are very positive about the hybrid side. I think, Scott, you are with, but you bring up some questions. But we do recognise that there are challenges. There are things that businesses are going to have to do if they're going to make it work for them. Just thinking on the employer side, I mean, a lot of what we talked about, most of what we talked about is the benefits for the employee. Flexibility of work, work-life balance, to be able to work where you feel you're most productive and when you're most productive. What do you feel? And Scott, you've run businesses, you've run teams in multiple places. What do you think are the potential opportunities and benefits for an employer in moving towards a hybrid workspace?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the obvious one is cost savings around the real estate. If you don't have so many people in the office, and if you have the opportunity, you could scale down the office space and make some considerable savings potentially on that. So that's kind of the obvious one, which has got kind of hard dollar.
I can give you some numbers on that, Scott. I think I spoke to someone at Suncorp recently, and they said they were looking at saving $10,000 a year for every employee that worked from home. And I think Google said that they will save this year $1 billion worth of employees' expenses around travel and entertainment and all those free lunches they give. So I think it's interesting. But sorry.
Yeah. No, I mean, but there's kind of some indirect cost savings, I suppose. There are talk of savings because employee absenteeism isn't so high. less sick days, more productivity. So indirect costs as well to organizations through those sort of things. We mentioned before about the diversity. I think you're pulling from a bigger pool. And there's a difference between hybrid and remote. So, if we're still expecting people to come into the office, your pool is slightly smaller than nationwide or internationally. So, as I said before, you potentially drawing from a 2-hour commute instead of maybe a 30 to 40-minute commute. But you definitely got access to more people. And then lastly, you're getting happier and healthier team members, which who wouldn't want that, right?
Absolutely. Is that do you go along with that, Laura? Is that the key? Is it around employee engagement?
I haven't got a lot to add. Honestly, my biggest benefits for the employer side, I just think if you can offer people the flexibility that they're craving to be able to show up at their best and to feel like, what my output is seen and what I'm delivering is seen, and it's not about me being at my desk from this hour to this hour. Like, I think that is when you're going to get the best work, the most creative ideas and flow coming out of your businesses. So I think for me, this is about, it's more innovative business models. And I think to Scott's point, downsizing office space, but also rethinking office space. Like, what is that used for? If we're using it for some of those recognition pieces that Melanie mentioned, if you're using it for some of the highly collaborative sort of discovery kickoff sessions in digital products, those spaces look very different. And so I think it's really got a lot of opportunity for rethinking the way things look physically for us as a business as well. So yeah, not a huge amount more to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point around the format of the office. A colleague of mine who's based in the UK, one thing he pointed out was how much money businesses spend on those offsite meetings. Going to hotels, and some of that's around just getting space, but a lot of it's around the environment, giving people a more comfortable, more enjoyable environment offsite. And there's a lot of money spent on that. And businesses now, if we're getting, having an opportunity to get rid of a lot of desks, we can then turn those into more kind of comfortable spaces to get together and collaborate. Thanks for that. Just another point, if anyone on the attendees want to ask any questions, please feel free to add some questions into the chat. If we can answer them straight away, I'll put it to Scott and Laura can answer them straight away, we will do. If not, we'll come to them at the end. So we recognise that there's benefits for both the employee and the employer, but obviously there's challenges. So Scott, what do you think are the main challenges for businesses that are looking to create a hybrid workspace or move towards more remote workers or people working from home a majority of the days of the week?
I'd say probably the biggest one for me is around leadership styles, and we touched on it earlier, but there is a need to operate in quite a different manner. So if you're, and I think Laura used the word trust, I'm not saying people lacked trust before, but there is definitely a higher degree of trust in teams that are remote or hybrid than if they're in the office. So your leadership style really then needs to be centered around ensuring that everybody's got a very clear understanding of what the purpose is and the clear milestones. Everyone's got the tools that they need to do the job, and that I mentioned at the outset, the assumption that everybody has access to the suitable technology, suitable space, suitable environment is not one that people should make. So before you go too far down this path, you really need to make sure that everybody has equal access to secure space and the tech and the infrastructure that you need. But assuming you do, then that should be fine. I think Melanie made a point there, which I did say about healthier and happier teams, but one of the downsides to kind of remote working is that that's not always the case, right? So we are seeing sort of increases in mental health and even other things which employers need to be aware of and considerate of as well. So there's some of the challenges.
Yeah, can I pick up on that point, Scott? Yeah. I definitely think the mental health piece is one of the top aspects that's come out of this hybrid environment that I think is a real challenge. We've talked about this a little bit before, but I don't think even traditionally prior to COVID, we've been particularly strong in many organizations around how we support mental health. So large organizations often do a great job of providing access to employee assistance programs, so offering free counseling, and that often extends to friends and family as well. but just in terms of, you know, the upskilling required as a manager to support mental health conversations, to support those self-harm conversations, you often find people really aren't confident in navigating that. And we haven't had a lot of explicit training on that since COVID, we've definitely seen mental health, you know, accelerating as a challenge. And because it can be quite a hidden challenge, it's extra hard to see it when you've got teams that are largely working from home. You're trying to judge off of less inputs, whether someone's feeling under the weather, whether there's a change in their behavior or their tone. So I think that is a really big part of, you know, when you're looking at the risk profiles for businesses, that is a massive one now. We're thinking about, it's not just about the business risk, that health risk to employees, and how we support leaders to have those conversations, and how we support employees to also set better boundaries. Like, I think that work-life blurring, it's good and bad. It's great for flexibility, but
absolutely.
In a way, you know, it's really tough for managing your time. And that third space, you know, Scott, I think you've talked about this a bit during the week. It's how do you switch off when you used to have that space between like work and home, and the reverse on the commute? It does do something for you in your thinking. So there's a lot in that point.
Yeah, I think the mental health is a key issue, Laura. And I know we talked about it the week of that gap of the commute, of blowing off steam on the way home. By the time you got home, you're a little bit more relaxed by the time you faced your family. Whereas going from this work office to the lounge, there's not a lot of chance to turn off. Scott, I suppose one of the key questions I want to ask you, and do you think it's harder to be a leader and a manager in a hybrid world than it would have been in traditional, or is it just different challenges?
I just think it's different, right? And again, it comes down to people's leadership style. And there are still a lot of leaders out there who manage through just visibility, right? I've seen you at your desk, therefore you must be working. I mean, it's not my style of leadership, and I don't particularly think it's very good. But I think, you know, if we shift to more of an outcome-orientated workforce, so I actually don't mind when you're working or where you're working, but these are the outcomes that I am expecting, and to this quality, surely that's what everybody should be striving towards. So I think the other point you made right at the beginning, you know, hybrid isn't just about physical location, it's about flexibility in the day. So if I want to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and crack on and do my work, and assuming there are no, you know, dependencies on other people and people needing to contact me, why can't I? But this then comes back to maybe having anchor points in your day that says, okay, well, you can work anytime you want. If you want to take the kids to school, if you want to go to the gym, that's absolutely fine. There are periods of the day where we need to collaborate as a workforce. So therefore, between, I don't know, 10 and 2, you know, there's an expectation that you're contactable. But to your point, Philip, it really, for me at least, comes down to setting up your purpose. So what is it we're all trying to do? Setting out kind of the key milestones of success, giving people the tools to be successful doing it, and then giving them the autonomy and space to crack on and be successul. That's not something everybody's comfortable with.
No, you're right. And these sound to me like kind of standard things. It doesn't seem that these are particularly hybrid related or remote working. So there's a question I have for both of you and for everyone is, do you think that some of the things we're looking at now are just because of the change? You know, it's given us the opportunity to take a fresh look at management styles around the way we engage our employees. And, you know, these are things that maybe needed to happen or were happening. And hybrid is just a push. Is that, sorry, Scott, please.
I was just going to kind of just tie it up. You know, that what I explained there is not new at all. It's, you know, it's basic Simon Sinek type leadership skills. But if you ignored it, then you could still carry on because you had a physical team in front of you, and you could carry on with your old methodology where there wasn't a purpose, and every day a new KPI popped out and you could just shout it across to the team and they would crack on and do that. That's what's kind of shifted, is that you don't have that anymore. So you need to be a lot more structured and set those kind of, we should actually be moving away from KPIs into kind of OKRs as well, where you've got this more holistic view of what the organization is trying to achieve and your part in playing that. I'm sure Laura's got a lot more to say on that.
That's going to take a lot of creativity, the point about how we measure success, because it's not just output or maybe a particular piece of analysis was delivered and the feedback was great, but that point about evaluating, values-driven behavior, that is increasingly difficult in a hybrid world. So how do you know that the way someone's getting something done is actually in line with the way that we want our employees to act, or that our employees expect from their peers as well? Like, obviously there's formal things like complaints and speak up forums, but that aspect is going to be really fascinating, I think, in the next, year ahead, in redefining how do we assess the how things are done, not just the what is done, and not just the time commitment piece as well. I think the other challenge that, Scott already started touching on, that learning by osmosis, the onboarding piece, I just have to say, I want to recap that, because that is a really critical challenge. Like, getting onboarding right has always been a challenge for organizations, and there's so much data in market about how much attrition there is for your employees if you don't get it right in the onboarding process. So I think, the fact that that's been exacerbated by people who don't get that face-to-face interaction, where we haven't pivoted sufficiently into building new ways of learning and engaging online, or where there's a discrepancy where someone's face-to-face and someone's not, to Scott's example, like, that is going to be really important. And I think for young employees, that's critical. We've talked a bit about this week, but for the graduates, that's the top thing. When you come into a new environment, particularly corporate, if you've only got limited internship experience, you learn a lot about the language and the way things get done in the team, like who you ask for help and how you ask them for help. And to Scott's point, just turning your chair around and asking for something rather than getting too far down the track and you've made, quite a few mistakes, so you're not on the right track. Like, I think that aspect is going to be really tricky for people who don't have a lot of experience in either an industry or a company, or even in their career at all. So I think we need to sort of, that's going to be a place where we can creatively brainstorm, and it's not top down. This has to be designed, co-designed with our people and listening to their experiences. It's going to be an important part of this.
Yeah, Scott, you mentioned earlier, and I think it is key. We do a lot of our work learning, by, as you say, by osmosis, or on the job, or just by asking our colleagues. Do you think one thing hybrid will mean is businesses need to just get better at the learning and development? We often relied on, just throw someone in, ask John or ask, Laura over there, and she'll help you out. We haven't often provided, particularly, different levels of induction, or do a great induction and then nothing else. So do you think businesses need to have to think hybrid will mean that they will have to focus a bit more on the structure of the learning development? Yeah,
I think so. And I think, as younger generations come into the workforce anyway, they have a different style of learning. So, sitting in a classroom or sitting in a meeting for an hour or 2 hours learning about things isn't the way they are learning now in school or in uni. So it's all kind of short, sharp video bites. So that makes that a lot easier in the hybrid world if you've got them set up to go. But again, they largely focus on hard skills. So it's how you do your job, process or procedures or whatever it may be. The stuff that Laura was talking about, the EQ side of stuff, is really, really tricky. And I don't have the answers. I don't know if Laura's got any thoughts on it, but how do you train how you have a conversation with a client? Or how do you, speak with your superiors or have a peer engagement session? I don't know how you do that on YouTube. Maybe you can, I don't know.
I've got a couple of questions for that. So first one is, and maybe Laura, do you think is it generational? Do you think whatever the generation coming into work is now called, do you think they are going to be more comfortable with making casual relationships online? They won't need the face-to-face, they won't be as video shy as maybe we may be?
I think anyone who's grown up in a really technology-focused environment, so obviously generationally that makes some difference, because people born into a time that already had technology is one thing, but really anyone born into a very tech-focused family or always studying tech-focused subjects in their schools, but I think that is going to be a big piece. If you're more technology literate, if you're comfortable, then of course this type of environment has stuff that you're already used to. I think Scott's used this example a few times around the YouTube self-paced learning. There are a lot of people out there who use YouTube as a key source to learn skills now, and even things at home, like if you had to fix something, that's a very go-to to Google something. So I think there's a lot of aspects around learning design that I think can lend themselves from things we already do in our personal lives and have already been pivoting, to be honest, in the last few years. It is a really interesting one in terms of not directly the focus of this this webinar, but obviously there's a lot happening in terms of reskilling programs and rethinking job families of the future. Like, hybrid work doesn't just happen in isolation. It's happening while organizations redefine their structures. It's happening while we redefine what jobs we're going to need in the future. So there's already a lot out there around we do need to pivot and accelerate the amount of learning we're providing. And a lot of that learning is on the job. There are so many learning models out there that say on the job experience is a critical part. It's not the only part. You need a lot of that exposure. You need a lot of that part where people are helping you interpret what you're learning as well. But I think, it is going to be important for us. It's one of the top things. And to Scott's point, we do need to think about how we translate the learning you get around, a lot of that, the EQ piece and how you communicate, a lot of that comes from what you observe and speaking to different people about how they adapt their styles. And, how do you work with this stakeholder in that team who's quite difficult? Oh, actually, you'll catch them on their phone, on text, because they're terrible on their emails. Like that stuff it's tricky, that you're going to have to find new ways as a team to share knowledge, and also in training sessions to think about how do you expose cohorts of people to really diverse leadership and communication styles so they can observe things that work for them and things that work in their job family or their role.
That's good. Sorry, go on, Scott.
I was just going to say, as an extension of kind of the onboarding and the learning, it's the coaching as well. So if you think about how coaching generally happens today, it's on the job in the moment, and done well. It's like observationally. Well, if there's less time for observations, there's potentially less time for coaching. So how do you change the coaching so that they're not missing out on that critical part of career growth?
Okay. I kind of want to translate it into, what are we going to do? How do we make it work? I've just got one question, maybe Laura and Scott. What do you think about kind of workplace culture? A number of people have commented that, in a hybrid world or remote, we're going to lose the team culture, or the opportunity of a business to create a culture. But I've also had the opposite side of that discussion of not all work culture is that great. We've all seen in Me Too, and we've all seen it and recognized it in our workplaces that you can have bullying, you can have discrimination, and potentially a more hybrid approach can actually be more positive to certain people. What's your kind of feeling on workplace culture and how the hybrid world deals with that?
Culture is going to be fascinating. I mean, I think the tough thing with culture is there's so many interventions that we as leaders, and particularly in a talent space, we focus on. But ultimately, culture comes from every single person. Like all of your employees, a particular team has their own culture within a giant organization. So that is going to be really interesting. I wish I had a great, succinct, mind-blowing answer, but I actually think we're going to have to see how it evolves. And also, this is where I continue to come back to co-creation, like thinking about how do you empower your employees to build the types of experiences and kind of co-working spaces that they want to see. Last year, we tested a few things with our graduates in how we brought them together socially and had them run different types of sessions. And it was very fluid. We actually asked them, you can bring games in here, you can get creative about, someone ran a session where it was just bringing an article that you read over the weekend and kind of sharing. And there were sessions that it was actually nothing to do with WIP, it was nothing to do with work. And parts of those interactions are what creates culture as well. So I would say my one point is, I think in the new world of work, we need to spend a lot more time listening and co-creating and realizing, as we've known for a while, like culture cannot just be top down. Of course, your leaders need to walk the talk, and they're going to have to learn new behaviors and new ways of signaling action in this world. But how we work with our teams and listen to them and allow them to actually create spaces for themselves and their teammates is really important.
Yeah, that's a huge area. So, we've certainly recognised the opportunities and the benefits, and we've talked quite a bit around some of the challenges. What do you two think are the key things that a business can do to make hybrid work? So, we decided we're going to shift across. Half of our employees want it, at least 3/4 want some flexibility. We want to gain and retain great employees. So we're going to, and we want to get the cost savings. So we're going to go hybrid. What do we do to make it work? Scott, what's your key points here?
Yeah, I think my biggest point would be don't lose the opportunity. So we've gone through this seismic shift. We've gone through a crisis. We've proven that it can work and people are more productive and broadly happier and have better work-life balance. There's a lot of positives that have come out of it. Don't lose that opportunity. Don't go back to how it was just because that's what a leader is most comfortable with. So that would be my first point. But secondly, don't leave it where it is, because we're kind of a lot in no man's land, right? So we've gone through the crisis. Hopefully, at the end of it, we're now looking in many cities in Australia to go back to the office in a hybrid world. So what does that look like? So I said at the outset, you really need to start to formalize this in terms of expectations around, we do want you back in the office, but for these reasons, because we believe it's the right thing to collaborate, celebrate, ideate, and this is how we think it looks. So pick a day, pick 2 days, but that's the days that those teams should come in, and these are the activities that we would expect you to do. Similarly, through those kind of work days, are there anchor points where you do expect people to be online? Are there flexibility in hours or not? So there's a lot of questions. We've just kind of skimmed the surface today, but there's a lot of questions that organizations need to think about and then kind of formalize it in terms of a communication, but not to the point that there's no more agility in it, because it's a suck it and see. So we're going to continue to evolve, and businesses should be continually reviewing. Is it working? Are we still getting the productivity gains? Are we still got the happy people? Are we still acquiring the right talent? So it's going to be an evolution.
Excellent. Yeah, Laura, sorry.
Yeah, I think to Scott's point, the real opportunity is to continue to co-design. A lot of these areas where we don't have an answer, it's to think about, how can we test and learn? We use a lot of that when we think about product design, particularly in a digital space. There's so much focus on experimentation. There needs to be an equivalent amount of focus on cultural experimentation and new ways of working experimentation. And that, I think, is a key opportunity which shouldn't just be led by the leaders. You should be building out, passionate employee groups to lead some of these pieces and see what works for everyone and see what works for your organization specifically. I would say on the etiquette point, sounds a bit minor, but we've had a few conversations about that over the last few weeks. If we can invest a little bit into explicit training, or at least explicit sessions to talk about how do we as a team want to work in a hybrid world? How do we want to work when we have some people on the phone and some people in the room? That is really going to go a long way, I think. So it's about the little things. Like if you're in a room, do we throw to the people who are on the line first to speak? Do we co-design the activities so that maybe there's an online platform we're using for collaboration and whiteboarding? Everyone's on their computer using the whiteboarding space, but even though some of us are in the room and some are online, there are dozens of these little pieces we can think about how we make the meetings more inclusive when there's a true hybrid meeting. And I think explicitly coaching for that, because to your point, Philip, we don't always have sessions specifically on running meetings. We do a lot of that in the graduate program space, but I do find we're not as supportive around our employees to do that. So I think these pieces, particularly at a team level, when they're people you're working with day in, day out, let's talk about the norms. Let's talk about what works for us and test both sides. Like if you've never been on the digital end of everyone else being in a room, sit on that and see what it's like and then think about that experience. I think that etiquette piece is probably my second point. And I think the third point is really let's overinvest in the right leadership and the right training and development and coaching that focuses on EQ, that focuses on people skills, and in particular, that mental health space, focuses on giving people the confidence to have conversations, the confidence to ask if people are okay multiple times a year, not just on Are You Okay Day, and to really observe the warning sign, and also the tools to allow employees to actually set better boundaries. I think investing in that training, investing in conversations around that it's just so important if we're trying to find a sustainable way forward in hybrid work. So those are probably my three things we can do.
Yeah, so planning needs to be done, but let's not get into, I think Melanie Armstrong's put a good point in the chat around businesses. We've seen businesses can pivot quickly. We've seen how quickly we moved to remote working last year. And what we can't do is get paralysis about looking for that perfect model. So it's plan well, invest, iterate, and involve and engage everyone, top down, bottom up. Scott, have you got any? I mean, I'm going to put in one of the things I want to mention. obviously a bit of a disclaimer here. Work in Sync is a technology company, and we do provide a solution for businesses, a technology and a management solution for businesses that want to go hybrid. I think there are some practical things that businesses need to worry about as well. Who's going into the office, who's going to attend, our team's going to attend at the same time. How do we manage that? So some of the kind of more boring parts of this discussion need to be focused on. So I think just to sum up what we're saying here is that we need to move forward, as Scott points. Don't shift back. Don't look for a perfect solution, but iterate, and don't forget the culture. I mean, the culture and etiquette. To your point, Laura, is incredibly important, and mental health. There is it's a very important part of our society, and it's a big challenge for all of us. So hybrid and the shift brings up new challenges. Is there anything you want to kind of? I'm looking now. We've got maybe 10 minutes left, but we can certainly finish earlier if we're finished. Is there anything else you want to add, Scott?
There was an unanswered question, I think, here from Nina earlier about which business functions are looking at the workspace and the work style fit. So Scott, I'm not sure, do you have any initial thoughts on that question around how are different job families or different types of organizations, how might they need to pivot their workspaces or rethink them?
You caught me on the hop there. No.
No, I did.
So which business functions need to think about what?
New workspaces. So I'll have some initial thoughts. I'm not sure if this is maybe exactly what Nina was getting at, but one thing I've really enjoyed thinking about, we've got very diverse job families in my area. So, for example, some of my stakeholders work in analytics functions in quite different types of roles across, insight space or data science or data delivery. And then on the flip side, we've got a lot of product owner, really digital, innovative roles and user experience and design roles as well. So I think those job families, what they need from their workspace is different. It's always been different. It continues to evolve. So I think now's a good chance where we have a chance to sort of rethink our office space and where we might have surplus space to work out for our critical job families for the future, for the ones that are expanding, what do they need? So for example, for digital teams and anyone working in those sort of really rapid agile environments to iterate products, then those collaborative spaces to have a lot of like whiteboarding, just simple stuff around the function of whiteboarding space or being able to move rooms and I think like moving wall spaces or create larger spaces for very large all hands versus small spaces for intimate collaboration. So I think in a digital landscape, that's one thing. If I think about technology, that's been probably the critical piece of feedback when I think about the analytics job families or anyone technical in engineering. Does your work from home setup, does your remote access actually support highly technical jobs to access the data and the tables that they need and the systems at speed? Because that was a really big challenge for us last year. And I think that in itself is one part of what people are seeking from the workspace, is actually just rapid connection to what they need to do. And for a lot of those job families in certain roles, particularly in heavy data science, roles, you might actually have days where you have a lot of desk time. And so the way you're using your time at home, it might fit quite well, actually, if you're not doing a lot of sort of meeting-based stuff except for presenting back key concepts. But if you were to come into the office and there was a set day, then making sure that you don't lose those intimate spaces. If there are still going to be job families and people working on really, critical pieces of work where they can't be distracted, you're going to have to think about, we have to design for all of those different, functions. So I'm not sure, Nina, if that was quite where you were going, but that's sort of one initial thought that I had. I'm not sure, Scott, if you have any other thoughts from, the job families and organizations you've worked with.
I think I'd take it more broadly. I think if you think about why would you want people in the office, and if we come back to keep those points around kind of co-creation, collaboration, ideation, they're all generally kind of collaborative spaces. So, if you think more broadly around the office space in totality, do you still need, actual physical desks with screens and keyboards on them? If you're expecting that sort of work to be done remotely when people are at home, and actually the office is now a collaboration center, not an office, then maybe the whole office becomes different segments where people can sit around and collaborate, if that is indeed what the purpose of the office is for that organization.
So we recognise the importance of the office. We recognise the value of the face-to-face, of the ability to collaborate and innovate together. But it gives us the opportunity to repurpose and rethink exactly what those offices are. And I think you mentioned, whether it was today or an earlier conversation, Scott, that people aren't just asking for permission to work hybrid and to work at home, but also they're looking for the employees to engage and to offer better facilities, make the office worth coming to.
Yeah.
If I'm going to.
But I guess we have to be cognizant that you shouldn't be talking about this in aggregate. Depending on the size of your workforce, that 10% who still want to come in every day still need to be catered for. So yeah, it's the devil's in the detail with this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think it was that Lassian article recently talking about what some of the things you can fail on. One of their points was don't think in the aggregate. Individuals have different individual needs, and you've got to be a bit more focused on what one person needs over another. And all the surveys, yes, majority, 50-60% want to work hybrid, but that's only 50-60%. There's still a significant proportion that want to be in the office day to day, and there's a small proportion that never want to come to the office.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your time. I think looking at the questions, I think largely covered them, either directly or as part of the conversation. So thank you very much, Scott. Thank you very much, Laura. Appreciate your time and some great insights, and speak soon.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.